and prestige, I wanted to get into a discussion of what compelled us to lose power and prestige, and hopefully what can we do to acquire them back. And of course what we need to do is to resurrect our minds. Milena Karenga, who I know you're familiar with, outlines the importance of historical study and inquiry in understanding our African selves and the world around us. If we approach the discipline honestly, it reveals our strengths and our weaknesses. It identifies our true foes and our true allies. What history reveals is that at times our foes are other peoples, and at other times the foe is ourselves. More often, though, it's a combination of both. One very well-respected Muslim scholar of Moorish Andalusian society named Ibn Hazm had declared the importance of historical study back in the 11th century, advising that young people begin their formal education at the age of 5. And he said history should be taught specifically to the developing youth so as to show the causes for declines and ascensions in ancient societies with the intention of avoiding repeated errors. How many of us of African heritage in this very Western society, with the exception, of course, of you who are here, take the time to instruct the youth in the historical knowledge of themselves, showing them the peaks and valleys of their Africanity and their humanity? And this should not only include the group's history, but the personal history of individual elders, the matriarchs and patriarchs within our own families. I remember asking myself very often, why did I elect to become a historian? Why did I choose to go and make this my profession? And then I remember discussions that I had with my uncle. Then I remember listening to my mother talking about my grandfather, who, coming to this country from Barbados and settled in Harlem, did all kinds of things. And I remember how that made me feel, to hear about this great person who was linked to me immediately, my immediate family. And then I began to recognize, just as Brother Maddox said, the idea that we are really an extension of all those who came before us. And that's a basic spiritual concept in traditional African society. And so I said, what I need to do is to begin to help the collective understand the importance of their past, so they can understand the importance of their present and acting in it. When external distractions and other personal apathy result in the failure of youth to sit, listen, and learn from the personal histories of their elders and general history of their people, then the potential wisdom of the next generation is dangerously compromised. Some of you may be familiar with the film Rosewood, which came out. Excellent film. I remember telling my class it was mandatory to go see Rosewood. And I even told them, I said, I'll give you 10 extra points on the next exam if you go. I mean, I was telling you, one sister came up to me and said, one of the 6 that were in the class, and said, Dr. Bey, I don't have the money. I gave the sister the money and said, look, there's no excuse to not go and spend $5 to see this movie. So she went, and class came back in, and we talked about it. And the Europeans in the class, of course, couldn't believe much of what they were seeing. Until, of course, I then raised the issue of students that I had, white students, quote-unquote white students, in my class who said they had family members who owned the body parts of African Americans who they had lynched. And this is in West Virginia. This is Morgantown, West Virginia. And to have this European American woman, and as I was recounting this, come to me and say that her uncle had a particular body part in a jar in his attic, and then to convey that to the class, and then for people to know who this person was, it brought it alive. And then they were shocked into having to accept that this was a reality. But the sad part about it is, again, next to Rosewood was Booty Call. And the few African American students who are in the town at the university went to see Booty Call. with the exceptions of the ones in my class. Now, again, part of this is this notion of self-hatred. Part of it is this notion of, all right, denial. I don't want to accept the fact that this is the way it is, because then I have to do something about it. And it's better for me to remain, in denial so that I don't have to act. Well, the illustrious Moors of old fell from power and prestige due to a number of factors, including some of the things that I've already noted. This also included their interaction with Europeans. Such interaction eventually led to the efforts of Europeans to subdue the Moors not only physically, but symbolically. In short, Europeans and Catholics, or Christians especially, found it necessary to cover up, challenge, and/or shamelessly recreate what the Moorish presence ultimately meant for and to the Western world. This decline of Moorish political, economic, and military power begins in Andalus around the 13th century and culminates by the 18th century. Just so everyone knows who I am talking about when I refer to Moors, here is my working definition of Moor: a predominantly African people with primary geographic and cultural origins in East Africa and secondary links with Near Asia. Primarily, they have been or are an Islamic people. However, they have also historically included Jews, Christians, and other religious traditions. Western histories most often associate them with northwestern Africa and the countries of Spain and Portugal. Some of the ethnic clan groups are composed of the Azenega, Sanheja, Hawara, Nafusawa, Kunta, Haratani, and Masmuda. Many historical, theological, and linguistic studies have been shown to exhibit strong ethnic correlations between Moors and the ancient peoples of Canaan, Moab, Phoenicia, Chaldea, Cush, and Kemet. Moor thereby proves to be an excellent starting point for identifying the great familial links between all such historically significant ancient peoples. Some people might say that the term Moor is basically like saying black, saying these people were all black. But for semantic, legal, in terms of legal, historical, and even cosmological reasons, I would disagree. Although the term Moor is evidently older than the religion called Islam, we generally recognize that the Islamic era is a high point for Moorish power and prestige. Consequently, history customarily emphasizes the Islamic era Moors. That would be basically, in terms of entering into Spain, into what becomes Spain, talking about the 8th century through about the 17th to 18th century. George James, in Stone Legacy, however, points out that the Moors were, and I quote, the custodians of the ancient Egyptians. George James goes on to inform us that after the fall of Egypt to the Greeks and Romans, many of the teachings that existed within Kemet were carried out of the country and into other parts of the Maghreb, into North and Northwestern Africa, by the people who would later be known as the Moors. So it shouldn't be that surprising then when you see universities, when you see people studying astronomy and mathematics and medical science and everything else in Moorish dominions and in Moorish Spain. And in this Islamic era of expansion, trade, and conquest, much intermarriage ensues between African, Asian, and Asiatic. Needless to say, the